Hello, folks. It's time to talk again about the importance of beating socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, liberalism, whatever ism you want to call it. And, it's important to our society, and everybody needs to understand this. And, it takes a little research and a little thought, but it's not that complicated, really. Some of it is very instinctive, by the way. But basically, what you have is that you have thousands of years of human experience that comes into developing a system whereby numerous individual humans can live together in relative harmony. And not only do that for their time, but continue that for many, many centuries or millennium into the future. And so this is, trial and error from back in the day. You had your first unit, which was the family. And, even early on, you had fairly large families. And they had to get along. If you have a family with a bunch of members going in all different directions, causing chaos and animosity and strife within the family will not survive. They couldn't concentrate their efforts on being prosperous and, feeding everybody and moving on and bigger and greater things. And so, we learn to live together in certain ways. And what developed was the nuclear family. You had the father, who was somewhat disciplinarian, who's, had his primary role within the family, the provider, the one who gave security, and safety to the family, the mother who was nurturing and who was sympathetic to the children at a young age, whereas the father was a little more disciplinarian. Now, it doesn't mean these roles were specific throughout. I mean, you had mothers who were disciplinarian when the need be. When the time arose and they needed to be disciplinarian, they would be. They kept their children in line. And then you had fathers who, when things were good and times were, a little better, they were softer and provided some nurturing to the children as well and some sympathy. But you had the primary roles, and this is what, made the nuclear family. And then as time went on, there was a bit of religiosity that was involved within these groups of humans. You started to have more than one family. You had several families, and so now you have tribes or whatever. Sometimes up to hundreds of people living together, and they needed some kind of commonality and things, and religiosity provided this. Not necessarily Christianity, but some sense that there was a greater purpose to our life, that there was a reason we were put here, that there was a path going forward, and that, we had certain morals and ethics that we would go by, not because we just individually decided, hey, I'm just going to be a good guy, but that there was a higher power that expected this of us, that we were expected to be better creatures than just the animals roaming out in the woods. And so religiosity became a second leg to that stool that provided, humanity this path forward to, continue success over hundreds and even thousands of years. And then finally, you had education, which was to teach the children of the tribe the history of the previous tribe, and to make them understand where they came from, where they were going, and why, and what gave it, the sense that it needed to move forward. And so early education was simply a verbal. You had people sitting around the campfire and telling stories about the past and how things had happened. And this gave a sense of pride to the community and gave children a pattern to look forward to pattern their lives after as they went forward. And so these three legs, the family, the religiosity, and the education, were these primary things that moved humanity forward so that we could actually live together in larger groups. And in these larger groups, we began to develop, much greater prosperity. The whole farming community came about. The delving into science and astrology and astronomy, came about. And a little astrology in there too. We all need a little entertainment. But anyway, you see my point. This is how we kind of develop this ability for people to live together and to prosper in larger numbers. And before that didn't happen. Back in the earlier times when all you had was the families and smaller tribes, the nomadic tribes and the hunter-gatherers and stuff. You didn't have these large numbers of people living together. And so this developed over time. And so it finally developed to the point where we had really large numbers of people living together, and it all kind of fell apart. That's when you started getting tyranny. That's when you started getting collectivism. That's when you started getting tyrants who would come in and say, you need me, this is a bunch of chaos. We got all these people living together and it's all chaos. You need me to straighten things out. So I'll come in with an iron fist and I'm going to tell everybody how to live. But I'm going to provide for you. We'll have security and we'll have prosperity, but you're going to do what I say. And the humankind went through that for a very long period of time. You had, some respite from it with the Greeks and then some little bit of republicanism with the Romans. But most of those societies ended up with, emperors, totalitarians, tyrants who ran the whole show. And this went on into, the 10th, 11th, 12th century to where you had the serfdom and stuff. You had your landowners who owned the castle, and then you had all of the serfs out into the neighboring countryside. And they owed their protection to the king of the castle. And so we humans lived under this for a long period of time. And so the greater the population became, the more the need for the totalitarian model to keep a lid on it all. And then an interesting thing happened. Martin Luther came along. Now you may wonder, well, Keith, what did Martin Luther have to do with it? Well, for the longest time, if you were a member of the Christian church, you were Catholic. You were beholden to the Pope in Rome, and that was it. There was no other game. Now, I know some Eastern Orthodox people will get upset with me for this because they'll say, wait a minute, we had something else going on even back then, and that's true. But universally throughout most of Europe and through most of the known world at the time that was Christian, most were Catholics. And so I'm going to concentrate on that, and we'll deal with Eastern Orthodox in a different vlog, perhaps. The point is that when Martin Luther came along, he changed the dynamic. He changed the dynamic of the individual's relation to God and religion, and he made it personal. I don't need a massive church. I don't need to pay for indulgences. I don't need to go confess my sins to some priest who says he's going to forgive me. I can do all this personally. I can personally worship God. I can personally contribute to the things that I want to contribute to. I can personally ask for forgiveness in Jesus' name, and it will be given. This changed the entire dynamic of the time. And what it did is it championed the individual. This had never been done before. We were collectivist, even from the early time of the family, it was collective, the family. In the tribe, it was collective, the tribe. In the greater tribes, it was collective. And then on into the bigger cities and these greater, city states and stuff that developed, you were part of that collective. When Martin Luther came along and changed religion, he changed the mental concept of what it meant to be a human being, and he added individuality to it. When our founders were developing our country, there was a great influence from Martin Luther. I mean, there were mostly Protestants that came to America back in those days. I'm not saying there weren't any Catholics, there may have been, but mostly they were Protestants. And they had this individualistic attitude towards the way things were done. And what this did, it added a fourth leg to the stool. It basically said not only do we have the family and the religiosity and the education, we also have the individual freedom to prosper, to collect our property and hold it for ourselves and make our particular family greater than the one across the street. It became an individual pursuit. Now, as long as you held into the previous norms of the basics of the religiosity, the virtues therein, and as long as you held your family together and stuff, and as long as you were still educating your children and stuff, then you could also add this fourth leg, that individuality, which is all about private property. It is all about the fruits of your labor belong to you and no one else. This concept never existed before Martin Luther came along. He didn't directly speak about these things, but the process that he put in place when he separated the individual from the church, he also separated the individual from the state, because the church was the state back in those days. So it's very important to understand that this was the fourth leg of that stool. And all of this is what this country was founded upon. And so you look at Marxism, socialism, progressivism, liberalism, whatever ism you want to put on it, and look at what they tear down. What do they try to destroy? They try to destroy the family. They try to destroy religion. They have taken over education and turned it into indoctrination. And they try to destroy personal property. Your ability to keep what you made, it belongs to you. No. A percentage of it belongs to us, and we will decide what that percent is. So going forward, when we decide what kind of a country we're going to leave to our progeny, how are your grandchildren going to live? You need to think about these things and try to decide what is it that you want them to have. Do you want them to be beholden to an all-powerful central state that decides what they can and can't have, what they can and can't do? Or would you like to hold on to those four legs of the stool that has provided progress and prosperity for mankind for thousands of years? Thousands of years, folks. And they want to take that away from you. Are you going to let them?